I got Leslyn Keith with me today, and we're going to do a little bit of an interview. I'm going to pick her brain on some things. So first, I want to, for those of you who don't know who Leslyn is, I want to give you her bio here. So Leslyn Keith is a certified lymphedema therapist and has a clinical doctorate in occupational therapy with an emphasis on lymphedema and obesity. Dr. Keith has started 4 lymphedema therapy programs in California, including 2 in private practice. She's treated lymphatic and fat disorders for over 20 years and currently researches, consults, and lectures on lymphedema, lipedema, and obesity nationally and internationally. She's an author of 2 books, published several articles about the efficacy of a ketogenic diet for lymphatic and fat disorders. And currently, Dr. Keith is Director of Research and Board President for the Lipoedema Project and an instructor in lymphedema therapy for closed training and consulting. Mm-hmm. So that's a bunch of stuff, Leslyn. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna also just kind of introduce a little bit with how I kind of got to know Leslyn. So my name is Robert Erksom, and I'm a lymphedema therapist in Wilmington, North Carolina. I have a practice there and worked with lymphedema patients for over 15 years, also about 15 years. And I could see a problem with a lifestyle and obesity and how it was contributing to lymphedema. So I came across some of Leslyn's work, an article that she had written, which led me to the first book that she has written that I mentioned there. And I read that and then learned that she also has created a program, a lifestyle and weight loss program that people like me that has a clinic that treats lymphedema can purchase and use. So I was really excited about that. Got the program in, started our first class in March of 2020, and we've been running it since. So it's a real pleasure to have a chance to chat a little bit. And I think that this conversation is going to hopefully be interesting to those that have an interest in this. I know I have a few followers on our YouTube channel, and many of you probably have swollen legs because I talk a lot about compression garments and different methods for putting those on. So that's, so I'm hoping this is going to be some interesting conversation today.
I think it will be. I'm so pleased to be here with you today, Robert. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, and I hope you don't mind the coffee sips. We'll keep it casual. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I did prepare with a couple of different questions of things that we can talk about. Anything else that you would want to add to the bio or to the introduction?
And no, I think you encapsulated very nicely. I would just say that it was quite by accident that I came to both treating lipedema and then starting to treat obesity and finding about, I think the main topic of our discussion today is the ketogenic diet and finding out about how that works. But it has really transformed my practice. And like you, I'm just trying to get the word out to as many people as possible, because I think this could be very transformative if people will integrate this into their home program, into their lifestyle.
Yeah. Can you think of, like, and this might be hard to pinpoint down, but can you think of like an aha moment or a piece of information or research that really kind of sparked your interest for the ketogenic diet for lymphedema?
Oh, absolutely. And you may even be able to think of something like that for yourself, because I think this is the type of thing that lends itself to, oh my gosh, I wish I would have thought of that before. But so what happened was I had been probably about 10 years in my practice treating lymphedema, and more of my patients were overweight and obese. And it made it very, very difficult to treat their lymphedema. And I felt hopeless. I didn't know what to do to help them, because the traditional thing of just eat less and move more, use low calorie, low fat, it wasn't working, and they weren't getting any better. And I didn't know what to do for them. And one of my patients happened to leave at my office a book by Gary Taubes called Why We Get Fat. And and I kind of ignored it for quite some time. My partner read it and he said, "You're going to have to take a look at this." I read it, and so this is what introduced in the layperson's terms the metabolic theory of weight gain. The whole thing about insulin and what has happened with how our diet changed 40 to 50 years ago by being encouraged to eat a plant-based, very high carbohydrate diet. And it just, a light bulb went off and I said, perfect. I got to get my patients to eat this way so they can lose weight, and thus their lymphedema will be easier to manage. And at that point, all I was thinking about was a way to manage weight. And of course, you know, over the last 4 or 5 years, we learned even more about just the benefits of eating a ketogenic diet for the lymphatic system, whether or not you need to lose weight. But that was my transformative moment, was reading that book and discovering that this is a way that I could really help my patients.
Yeah. Awesome. And yeah, I think you're right. We've all had those moments. Of course, one of my moments was reading your article. I'd always been interested in lifestyle because it felt like it was like this missing piece in what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Our patients had not just lymphedema, but lots of chronic illnesses and a lot of obesity related stuff. And you just feel, yeah, I had the same feeling, like, what can I do to help them more?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit like we're putting just a Band-Aid on everything and not really striking at the root.
Yes.
I think one of the studies that really got me fascinated was that mice study where they actually showed improvement in lymphatic flow and new lymph vessels forming across the scar. And it was to me transformative in the way that anytime somebody had asked, can lymphedema get better? We always had to kind of be the bearer of bad news and say, it's a chronic condition. It can't really get any better. We can just manage the symptoms. And then this research is starting to come up where it's like, it looks like it actually can get better.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about the study by Wong and others, where they showed that ketones actually stimulated fatty acid oxidation that proliferated those lymphatic vessels. And so, yes, they said that this could have implications for improving lymphedema. And so in Europe, they've taken off with that, and they're now doing studies with people, you know, because, you know, the first step is looking at it in animals, but we're not mice. So in order to see how that really works, they're using a ketogenic diet with people I think it's out of Belgium that they're doing the study. They've also did their own mouse study just to prove a concept. And now they're doing it with people. And preliminary results are that it's showing that there is improvement in lymphatic function. It is absolutely amazing what ketones can do for you.
Yeah. So in our little world of lymphedema, that's like groundbreaking. It's huge where we can say, well, maybe there's actually hope here. And so then the next question kind of that I had was, okay, so if there's emerging research that the keto diet can improve lymphatic function, then a second question would be, where are there any dangers involved? So I am going to ask a lot of questions throughout this interview about the things that people are worried about with the keto diet. So we'll have some time to address some of those. But if you were to, you may have done it already, but if you were to just, so I should mention now, and we'll mention it throughout. One reason I wanted to interview Leslyn right now is that you are just getting ready to publish a book. Probably by the time we publish this video, the book will be out. We're hoping to coincide with that. And I have read the book, and it is really fascinating. The second book is, I understand, written more to the patient population, if we call it that, or it doesn't have to, you don't have to be a clinician to read this book. But I have to say, even though I've worked with lymphedema for many, many years, I gotta get that. Even though I've worked with lymphedema for many years, and I thought I knew a lot about the lymphatic system, I was learning new things about the lymphatic system, even on the physiological, like what it does in this book. But it also talks about the keto diet and how that fits in with this whole picture. And so on the book, can you give a short synopsis or a short description of how does the keto way of eating improve lymphatic function?
Yes, because that's what I was saying when I wrote my first book, which was the Ketogenic Solution for Lymphatic Disorders. That was really focused on just losing weight and thus having a favorable impact on your lymphatic system and your lymphatic disorder. But the second book, the Lymphatic Code, I'm really looking at the lymphatic system in general, all the things that we know about it, because it's been very ignored for a long time. And so the new things that we're learning about it and the impact that diet has on the lymphatic system. And so a very short synopsis, because this book is really directed towards the lay person, whereas the first book was directed toward the healthcare professional, but lay people are reading both. What I do is make a case in the book that carbohydrates are inflammatory to the lymphatic system. And this has been demonstrated in some very good studies. And then how fat actually fuels the lymphatic system. It helps us generate new lymphatic vessels. It helps increase transport capacity, so you have drainage and movement so much better. So this way of eating, I do feel, is the best for your lymphatic system. And if you have a healthy lymphatic system, you have a healthy life. And you definitely improve your health in all sorts of ways. I do talk in the book about all the different types of chronic illnesses that that plague people in the kind of modern chronic illnesses: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, autoimmune diseases. And I talk about the lymphatics involvement in each of those conditions and how a ketogenic diet is going to improve not only the function of the lymphatics, but help improve that condition. So I do think that people will be fascinated like you were with the book. I think it'll hopefully help a lot of people.
I think so. And that part that you just mentioned there, like, so working with lymphedema, I knew that the lymphatic system is important, obviously, but there was a lot focused on swelling, chronic swelling that comes with lymphedema. But it was, there are a lot of eye openers in there and what else the lymphatic system actually does and what it affects. And I do think that a lot of the things you have in there are new enough that when I took my lymphedema training, we didn't know these things. So it is exciting that even though the lymphatic system has been ignored for many decades, it's also exciting to see the amount of research that's going on right now about the lymphatics. And a lot of that, I feel like, is compiled in this book in an easy to view way, but just the impact it has on so many. And when you look at the list of things that it impacts, the list matches the things that we see on a daily basis.
Right.
The problem,
because our patients are they're not just coming in just with lymphedema. They have all kinds of other conditions. Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like this description of the lymphatic system and lymphedema fits reality better than the lymphedema training I got 15, 20 years ago. That was a lot focused on surgery where lymph nodes were removed. And then I came into reality and saw some of those, but majority of my patients did not have lymphedema because of surgery. They had it because of chronic illnesses. So I feel like it matches reality a lot more. So I think for people that read it too, they're going to recognize that, this may be part of the explanation of why I'm sick, that it has a lot to do with the lymphatic system. Cool. So, and what we've talked about lipedema, and some that are listening to this or watching this may not even know what lipedema is. So you want to give a short explanation to what lipedema is. I say some of the ones that are listening, sad to say, many in the healthcare world does not know what lipedema is either.
Yes.
So we're trying to spread knowledge about that. So if you want to give a little description of lipedema and then also how it relates to the keto diet.
Sure. Because soon after I actually did a small pilot study with my patients using ketogenic diet, and they all had lymphedema and obesity. And I do believe that I had 2 participants in the group that were undiagnosed with lipedema. And so it was always my wish to see if this diet could also work for lipedema, because lipedema is actually a fat disorder. It's an adipose tissue disorder, and it happens almost exclusively with women. And what happens is usually around puberty, pregnancy, or menopause, you have a sudden onset of incredible amount of fat deposition from the waist to the ankles, and sometimes also the upper arms. There is some orthostatic edema, or just some edema that collects at the end of the day, kind of trapped in the fat tissue. Some of my patients have had as much as 5-10 pounds weight gain in one day, and that's with fluid. And then it has a tremendous pain hypersensitivity to the tissues. So a very light touch can cause a burning and very sharp pain. And also these women experience just an incredible weight gain that continues if it's unchecked, and has long been accepted that it's non-responsive to diet and exercise. So the typical weight loss diet of very, very low calorie, low fat diet and intensive exercise has never worked for these women. They lose more weight off their trunk, where they don't have a lot of fat deposition unless they are also obese, and nothing happens to their legs. The legs don't get smaller. So, so once I had success with my pilot study with my patients who were overweight or obese and had lymphedema, I turned my attention to lipedema, and now have been working for about 5 or 6 years with Lipedema Simplified, Lipedema Project, really working on kind of experimenting, having women do some self-experimentation and seeing what can work. And it has been pretty spectacular. If you have this disorder, of course, before making any major dietary change, you're going to check with your healthcare provider and make sure this is going to be okay for you. But we've been finding with our women with lipedema is that before there's any weight loss, any size reduction, we're talking sometimes within 2 weeks, the pain goes away. And I believe that this has a tremendous, it's tremendously influenced by the lymphatic system, because we're reducing the inflammation and we're reducing that pain, and the lymphatic system is integral with that. And so I'm finding out so much about this diet that is not related to weight loss, which is fabulous for that, of course. But it does impact all kinds of other aspects of health. And what we're finding very spectacularly with women with lipedema is that whereas no diet affected that lower body fat before, now they're losing size, volume of that fat tissue on the lower body when they eat this way. So it seems to work very, very well with lipedema as well.
And I know throughout your book and whenever we have a conversation, you have a very scientific approach about everything. So I know you're always very careful about making statements. And one thing I've thought about since a lot of this is kind of emerging research, is even though we don't have large population studies on, say, for example, lipedema, to me, it's very interesting if you have, even if you only had one case where a person has tried to diet low calorie for 20 years. And I've seen these patients. These aren't unusual cases. You recently had one that was eating, I think, 1,000 calories a day, which is very, very little. And she was visibly skinny, almost malnourished in this area. You could see the clavicular bone, but there was a large amount of fat on the hips and on the upper arms. And so nothing she had done for 20 years had worked. And even at that low of a calorie diet, and then you switch to the keto and you start seeing progress. So that's not an insignificant finding. And if you can duplicate that with several cases, then we really are onto something here, even though we don't have 1,000 cases to show. But nothing else had changed. So you change one factor and the whole results change.
Right.
That cannot be ignored.
Yes. And there was a small pilot study that came out of Norway. They haven't published it yet, but it was used for a master's thesis. And so I got a copy of the master's thesis. And one of the principal investigators was presented at our conference that we had virtually last November. And she gave the results of that, which were absolutely spectacular. It was less than 10 women with lipedema, but they did 4 weeks of, I think it was actually, yes, 4 weeks of a ketogenic diet, followed by another 4 to 6 weeks on a standard Norwegian diet. And so they lost the pain, they lost volume when they were doing keto. It all came back, when they did the standard higher carb type of eating Norwegian diet. So we already do have, with the small pilot study, we have some preliminary evidence. Of course, we hope to have much larger, longer term studies, hopefully with randomized and control groups and stuff like that. But I do believe that it's very promising, and that we are going to, substantiate what we're seeing anecdotally.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. So maybe we can then move on to, so we've kind of made the case now that that the ketogenic diet first of all, that the lymphatic system has a lot more functions than what we've known. So it affects basically every organ and every function in the whole body. And you write about it in the book too, even the brain. So that's an example of something that was that definitely has changed since I got my training. There was a question on the test about that, and the answer we were supposed to give was that all organs in the body have a lymphatic system except for the brain and the spinal cord, and that has now changed. So there's lymphatics in the brain, which brings out a whole new area of research. So we made the case that the lymphatic system is hugely important for all health. And then we made the case that there's a lot of good emerging research coming out that the ketogenic diet seems to improve lymphatic functioning, and also that it can improve lipedema with actual fat loss and fluid loss, where no other diet has been able to show that. So if someone's then watching this or listening, and they might think, okay, so there's some anecdotal, there's some emerging research, there's some pilot studies. But then they learn that a ketogenic diet is to eat very low carb and high fat, right? And then so when you say high fat, it goes right against the things that we have heard all of our life.
Yes.
So then the question is it safe for us to move forward with this based on the research that we have? So to answer that question, I'm gonna ask you some of the questions that we get, that I'm sure you get all the time.
Yes.
So let's start with, what about the cholesterol? That probably comes out first. So you're telling me I'm going to eat saturated fats, animal fats, and isn't that going to clog my arteries and cause heart attacks and strokes?
So we now are lucky enough to have, in the last 20 years, a lot of research that is showing that cholesterol, saturated fat specifically, is not a danger to the cardiovascular system. There is no correlation between increased cardiovascular events, or all-cause mortality between eating saturated fat and having high cholesterol and these kinds of conditions. So there is now a lot of evidence. Interestingly, when they first changed our way of eating and said, you have to cut out saturated fat, lower your cholesterol, eat lots of plants, have a high carbohydrate diet, there was absolutely no evidence that that was a better way of eating. Yet that's what was promoted. And we started with our dietary guidelines that were published in 1979, 1980, and transformed not only how we were eating in the United States, but it spread to the rest of the world that this was the better way of eating. And there was absolutely no evidence. Zoe Harcum from Scotland, as part of her PhD work, did a study on what was the available information when they changed the way that they told everybody to eat. When those dietary guidelines were published, what was available? And she found there was zero evidence that that was the better way to eat. What is interesting, that if you look to historically how humans have eaten, historically, we ate mostly animal source products. Animal source foods that were supplemented by some plants. So prior to agricultural, the revolution where we started, having these huge fields of plants and increased our production of that, we subsisted, and there are still primitive cultures that still subsist on a mostly animal sourced diet. And particularly if you're in areas where it stays quite cold for most of the year, there wasn't plant sources of food for 9 months of the year. And so during that time, they didn't eat any plants. So this is the way that humans developed. And one of the ways that we got our big brains is because we ate lots of fat, and we ate animal sources of fat. Yeah. So there's a lot more evidence that this way of eating, historical evidence that this way of eating is more appropriate for humans. And now, since we are now allowed to test eating high fat on a human subject, now we have also the evidence in that this is also a safe way of eating. It does not have an unfavorable impact on your cholesterol. And that goes to another discussion on what's unfavorable in cholesterol, because that has become skewed, that we unreasonably have assumed that high levels of cholesterol are bad and they're associated with heart disease, and that is turning out to not be true. It turns out that people with higher total cholesterol actually live longer and do better. So there's lots of research with that coming out, but there was other skewed presentations of data and published works. So and that predominates what you can find online. So definitely you're going to be, if you put in cholesterol and heart disease, or high cholesterol and death, you're going to find all kinds of stuff, but it's important to read the details. A lot of these studies were not done well, and they conflated various factors. As you were just talking about earlier, Robert, that when you only change one thing, it's more likely that that one thing caused the change that happened. And in a lot of these diet and health studies that they have done, they were changing many things. And so it's hard to isolate what is the thing that caused the things to get better or worse.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You said it spread across the world. So I grew up in Sweden in the 80s, and I have the food pyramid etched into my memory. I mean, there was I still can see the poster that was hanging on the wall in my classroom. So it's amazing how fast that information went across the world and how established it became. So then it's really hard to question it. So when there's an old idea that's been around for that long, it's almost like the strength of it lies in the longevity of how long it's been around. And it's almost like it's too late to question it now. So the burden of proof lies on the one that's questioning it.
Right. And so I'm working on right now a presentation that I'm going to give at our next virtual conference. It's happening in October. And I want to talk about remembering what we used to know. So we're presenting all these innovations for treatment of lymphedema and lipedema, but it's really just remembering what we used to know. Is this really innovations?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and there has been some, of course, some wonderful discoveries, like you say, about the lymphatics in the brain and stuff like that. But we really just need to remember what we did used to know before, it just, like you say, the food pyramid took over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And you might have answered this question already, but red meat has a really bad reputation, and many people are told to stay as far away from red meat as they can, especially if they have heart problems. So what are your thoughts on that?
So again, there is absolutely no evidence that there is a correlation between red meat and heart problems. A lot of that information comes from studies that are observational studies, and they do what's called a food frequency questionnaire. And they say, over the last year, how much red meat have you eaten? How many pieces of bread have you had? And you're having to recall that information, which is probably not terribly accurate. And one of the largest studies that does this is the NHANES. And they, I can't remember what those initials stand for, but it's NHANES. And it's a huge thousands and thousands and thousands of people over a great number of years that they're tracking people, and they ask them all these kinds of questions. They're asking them to try to remember this stuff. And so as several epidemiologists have looked at those studies and said the answers that the majority of people are giving on those studies is not compatible with life. What they're saying that they consume, they could not be still alive, as far as they're not eating enough, they're not getting all their essential, nutrients, or, so it's not compatible. So those kinds of studies are very, very skewed. And so you have to really look at these types of studies. If you're trying to recall what you ate over the last year, can we really, accept that as hard evidence? Now, if you're doing something where you're logging as you eat it, you're putting stuff down, that would be a much more accurate thing. But then also you need to be able to track, is there anything else in your life that's happening? For instance, some of these studies that said that red meat was bad, it was also if they were smoking. I mean, so I mean, what else is happening in that person's life? So it's nutrition studies are very, very hard to do well. You can do them very well on animals because you can control everything, but humans, you simply can't do that, and we shouldn't do that, right? So it's very, very hard to get good data from human nutrition studies.
And that's kind of been part of the problem, is that a lot of the conclusions have been drawn from correlation, meaning two things happen at the same time. Doesn't mean that one thing caused the other thing. Right. And, so
what I like to say is that obese people wear longer belts than lean people. Therefore, do longer belts cause you to be obese? No, they're just associated with each other.
So there are associations and correlations. And so that realization was one too, because it's hard to kind of get over the idea to say about, well, we've been taught this for so long, like how could we just all of a sudden be so, or how could we have been so wrong? But that I think is a big part of the explanation once you look at how the advice was, how we came up with that advice, and that it was mostly from association and correlation, not from really. And like you said, even if you begin with how you gather the data to begin with, and if that is not an accurate way, then the data doesn't really mean anything.
And the other thing that happened with a lot of those studies is that, and this is something that we all have to be careful of, that we have our own biases. We think this is the way something is going to go, and therefore we zero in on something that supports our hypothesis. So I'm very, very conscious of that, and hopefully don't want to do that, because I do believe so strongly that a ketogenic diet is the healthier way to eat. But I don't want to ignore anything that might be contradictory to that. But what happened in a lot of these studies, coming from the 50s on through the 80s, is that they only used the data that agreed with their study, their hypothesis. You know, the ones with Ansel Keys, you know, where he published this data on the 7 country studies. Well, there was actually 22 countries that he looked at, but the data that fit his hypothesis was only in those 6 countries. And so, so he only published that. And there was several others, other studies that they never even published the data. It was suppressed because it didn't support their hypothesis. So they ran an excellent study, but it didn't come out with the saying that saturated fat or cholesterol was bad for you. And so they suppressed it. And so, and some of these studies are now just, you know, 20 years later, we're getting the information about that.
Wow, that's really fascinating about the 21 countries. And yeah, and that's the human nature bias. And just like you said, we have to be careful. And that if we now believe that the keto diet is the best, I like how you say that. It's now we have to be open-minded. If some study came out that really questioned that whole idea, we have to look at it and see. So, okay, one other question that I've gotten from some of my participants, and is a really common surgery is to remove the gallbladder.
Yes.
And some people know that the gallbladder has to do with digesting fat. So what about being on the ketogenic diet if you don't have a gallbladder, or if you have gallbladder or problems with a gallbladder?
Yes. And so it turns out that a low fat diet is actually probably the main cause of getting gallstones. And the main reason you have your gallbladder out is because gallstones are so painful and it's hard to get rid of them. And so they just remove it. And so this gallbladder removal is probably the most common surgery, at least in the United States. I don't know, it might even be worldwide. But so now you need the bile to digest fats, and the gallbladder is what stores the bile, and it will, in response to you eating something that has fat in it, it will emit enough bile to help you digest and absorb that fat. And so now you don't have a reservoir for it. And so how, if you're going to eat a lot of fat, how are you going to be able to accommodate with that, without a gallbladder, without some storage? Because what happens is that your liver is just going to dribble out constantly a little bit of bile. So you still will have bile present, but it may not be enough when you actually have a meal, and then you need to digest some fat. And so there are many people that without a gallbladder that use a ketogenic diet, and basically they need to start out slowly with adding fats to their diet. So you see what your tolerance is, and you will know that you've exceeded your tolerance if you get diarrhea. You simply will not be able to digest that fat, and you will have diarrhea. So then you'll have to back off. Now, many people, I would say by far a majority of people, are using this way of eating because they are overweight. They want to lose body fat. And so essentially you can use your own body fat as the fat portion of your diet. You don't have to eat a lot of fat when you first start eating this way, if you have some body fat to lose. Now, if you don't have body fat to lose and you want to eat this way, my recommendation is to start slowly and gradually increase your fat intake as you're able to tolerate it. And then there are supplements like ox bile supplements. You can get a health food store that can help you when you're eat something that has some particularly delicious fat in the meal, and if you're worried that it might exceed your tolerance, you can take that supplement. Of course, you're doing all this with the guidance of your healthcare provider.
Yeah. So do you take that ox bile with the meal? So
yes.
It's right then, it will help it. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And you did point out something that I think can be a misconception about the ketogenic diet. We often think of it as a high fat first, but I'm understanding, and also from the book, that and that it's more the emphasis should be low carb.
Right.
So what you're saying, if it is somebody, if I'm understanding you right, if somebody has a gallbladder or problem, or don't have a gallbladder, they can begin by cutting carbohydrates, but they don't have to focus so much on adding fat.
Right.
So then a question: what if they're if they cut their carbohydrates all the way down to 20 grams, which is kind of where we start, and then we usually say eat till you're full. You don't have to go hungry, and they don't have a gallbladder, so they have to limit their fat a little bit so that they don't get stomach problems. Sorry about that. Then what should they eat instead? Should it be protein, or if they're still hungry because they're not eating all the carbs they're used to?
So of course the best macronutrient for satiation is fat, but protein can also increase your satiation. So, and typically, because we've been focused on a plant-based diet for so many years, a lot of people are not eating enough protein. And so by increasing your protein level and maybe increasing your fat a little bit, but not going overboard on the fat until you can tolerate it, I think you will still be able to get satiated in actually a pretty small meal, probably smaller than you're used to eating. Carbohydrates are not filling. They, if they have a lot of fiber in them, they can add bulk and will be temporarily filling. But if you're also eating a lot of high carb, high starch plants, potatoes and rice and pasta and bread and stuff like that, that high starch stuff is going to actually cause your blood sugar swings that are going to make you feel hungry very rapidly after a meal. And so you don't feel satiated for a very long time. So if you have that gallbladder issue, even if you do have a gallbladder, but you have a history of gallstones, eating a lot of fat can mobilize that bile and may push a stone into your, in that bile duct. And that's where we get the pain, is it gets stuck in that little tube that takes it to the intestines. So you may want to not do a whole bunch of fat to start out with until you get rid of those gallstones. So I would say you're going to increase your protein, and it's not going to be bad to eat more protein. We need that for healthy, dense bones, as well as muscles, for making enzymes, hormones, all kinds of body functions. You need that protein. So I would not be worried about increasing your protein at all.
Yeah. Good. So a couple of things. Some people will say, they'll say, well, I'd like to try it, but it's too expensive. And then the other thing you can hear is, well, I might could do that for a short while, but can I do it for a longer period of time? So I guess this is a couple of questions in one. Is it expensive, and is it sustainable? And some might also say, I'll throw 3 questions in here and let you address all of them. Will I get bored with the food? I had one person say, well, I tried it, but I got sick of avocados.
So don't eat avocados. I mean, there is so many food choices on a ketogenic diet, so many delicious food choices. When I did my small pilot study, I gave them a food list. I used Dr. Eric Westman's food list that he gave at his Duke Lifestyle Medicine Clinic when he introduced a ketogenic diet to his patients. And I said, let's go through and highlight or circle all the ones you like, because you give someone a food list and they think, okay, I have to eat everything on this list. Well, it has okra on that list. I don't like okra, so I can't do this diet because I don't like okra. So you need to go through and find those foods you like, because the main thing about this way of eating is it's sustainable, because you're going to enjoy the food you're eating. And the food is going to make you feel good. And a lot of people, when the pain goes away, when they have more energy, when the brain fog lifts, they can't imagine eating back to how they used to be and feeling how they used to feel. So that in itself, it helps it to be sustaining. But is it expensive? No, it is not. As a matter of fact, it's going to be probably less expensive to eat this way, even if you go everything organic, wild caught, free range, grass-fed and grass-finished. It won't be more expensive because you end up eating less. And so we always say that, calories don't matter, but I mean, it's at some point, calories are going to matter for that person trying to lose weight. And so you self-limit your calories because you simply are satiated. Your cells have all the nutrients it needs. You feel good, so you stop eating. The traditional way of eating with a high carb diet, we graze all day long. We never stop eating. And so with this way of eating, you're going to have discrete meals, and quite often people go to only twice a day, sometimes once a day, because they're simply not hungry and they feel great, they have plenty of energy, so they only eat a couple meals a day. You're going to save a lot of money with that. We're also we're eating whole foods and that aren't, you know, processed and packaged into a box. And some of those box foods, they're very, very convenient because you just pop into the microwave and then eat it. But they are, you know, super high carbohydrate. And so they make you hungry in 2 hours. And so you're going to need another microwave meal. And so that could be very, very, very expensive. But if you have a morning meal of, you know, your eggs and your bacon, and yes, if you like avocado, put a little of that on there. And then you're full until you're ready for your evening meal. Then you're having these 2 meals a day that it's, quite often I will get a steak, even at a restaurant or at home. I'm full after eating half the steak because I'm eating all the fat that comes with the steak. You know, the lean steaks, you know, you get this huge steak. And so now you're eating the whole thing, but there's no fat on it. And so I eat that. Instead of getting 2 meals out of that, I'm only getting 1 meal out of that.
Yeah.
So this way of eating, it is pleasurable, it's satiating, you will feel better, and it's not expensive.
No. And I can confirm all those things. We're up to about 35 patients now that I'm following for this, and some express. Another thing that some people say is it's sometimes I hear words like extreme or restrictive, but what people find is when the cravings go away, that's freedom. When you can be full for so many more hours at a time, it's freedom, because you're not always wondering where you're going to get your next meal and when you're going to crash next. And where you got to have something. When you can go 12 hours without eating and feel totally fine. It's kind of a freedom for your daily life. You're not as and I experienced that myself. It used to be I would get nervous if I got busy and I was worried I wasn't going to have time to eat lunch.
Yes.
Well, now it's not a big deal. I know I can eat later. I'm going to function.
Yes, and that was one of the first things I noticed too. And it was always such a hassle that I had to stop what I was doing, fix something, eat it before I can get back to you know, working at the clinic. And now I would, you know, you just work straight through, and I didn't even think about food, and here it is 3 o'clock, and you know, I'm continuing to go. So yeah, that is a lot of freedom. I remember traveling, you know, you drive for a long distance, trying to get somewhere, and then always around noon, okay, where are we? Let's find some place to eat. I'm in a strange town. Don't have to do that. Pull over and get some gas, keep going. So it does give you a lot of freedom.
I think so. So I think it's been super interesting. We're about to run out of time. So I want to make sure that people know where they can get your book.
Sure. So you can go to my website. It's my name, leslynkeith.com. And I have both of my books available there as ebooks, as a PDF download. And so the first one, the Ketogenic Solution for Lymphatic Disorders, that's directed towards the healthcare professional. And then the Lymphatic Code is more to the lymphatic professional as well as the lay person. And so they're both available there. The print copy of my first book is already available at compressionguru.com. And the print copy of my new book will be available on September 28th, also at compressionguru.com.
Nice, awesome. And anywhere else, if anybody listened to this and thought this is interesting, I'd like to hear more what Leslyn has to say. Where else can they find information or some of your work or videos or?
I do have my own YouTube channel as well. And so I have some things there. I do a lot of work with Lipedema Simplified and the Lipedema Project. And so you can hook up to different webinars and stuff, free webinars and things that I do with that. So you can find that there. On the Lymphatic Education and Research Network, Learn, they have a online videos. I gave some presentation about ketogenic lifestyle for lymphatic and fat disorders. And so that is on, the recording of that is on their website. You pretty much, you put my name in and Google that, you will find a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and a lot of good stuff, I can say. And that Lipedema Project is a really nice organization. Attended some of the seminars, and it's a very top-notch, latest research stuff. So is there anything else that I haven't asked you about, or something that you feel like we're leaving out?
No, I think we covered it. I just know that, you know, you and I can sit here and talk about this, discovering about the anatomy, physiology, and the development of the lymphatic system. So I think I hopefully present it in a way that is not dry and you will enjoy it. So check that out. I think I have, I'm not sure, but I think I have on my website a sample of what you can find in the book, but check it out, go to my website and check it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I think we will leave it there. It's always, like you said, I think we could chat for hours about this. I think we share the passion because it's so exciting to see how it's improving people's lives and be able to offer that to people. So thank you for all your work. It was a tremendous work doing that book, and it is, even though you have a strong passion for this, you can tell in the book that you're also very particular about making sure you're referencing studies and that you're not just making claims that can't be backed up. And that's something I appreciate.
Yes.
So, yep. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Robert. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.